This week's story is sponsored by Audible. Please visit audiblepodcast.com/storynori for your free audiobook download. The Watermelon Prince. Hello, this is Natasha. And this is a story from Vietnam about the origin of watermelons. Watermelons are a delicious fruit. They are large, round, and green on the outside and red on the inside, and they have lots of black seeds. They are truly refreshing on a hot day when you are feeling thirsty. But that's not the only way you can eat them. In Vietnam, people eat roasted watermelon seeds as part of the New Year celebrations known as Tet. All in all, they are a very scrummy and special fruit. And this is the story of how they first came to Vietnam. But before the story, I'd just like to tell you about a special audiobook that you can buy from our sponsor Audible. It's called The Quite Remarkable Adventures of the Owl and the Pussycat by Eric Idle. As your parents or grandparents might know, Eric Idle was part of a famous comedy team called Monty Python's Flying Circus. In this audiobook, he takes you on a wonderfully silly musical adventure based on the nonsense poem The Owl and the Pussycat. To buy the book, just go to audiblepodcast.com/storynori. That's audiblepodcast.com/storynori. Or follow the link from our sidebar. Many centuries ago, a gale blew across the land of Vietnam. It leant on the palm trees so that they bent their branches to the ground, and it grabbed red tiles from the roof of the great palace and chucked them across the courtyard. Out at sea, great waves made war on the cliffs, pounding at them with all the force of nature. Most of the local fishermen had seen the storm coming from afar, and had pulled their boats well back from the shore and tied them fast to the ground. But a merchant ship was caught in the storm, and its hull was dashed to splinters on the rocks. Everyone on board was drowned, except for one. By some miracle, the waves carried a basket containing a newly born baby, and they deposited it on the beach not far from the great palace. The morning after the storm, a fisherman's wife was out walking along the beach and searching through the debris for anything of value. She heard the baby's cries and discovered its basket under some torn-off palm leaves. She knew from the swaddling clothes of the child that he belonged to a rich family, and not knowing what else to do, she took him to the palace in search of a reward. When the king heard of this infant who had been saved from the storm by a miracle, he thought that it must be a very special child indeed. He adopted him as his own, and he grew up to be Prince Mai An Tiêm. Mai An Tiêm proved to be a popular young man, with wisdom and knowledge beyond his years. Often the king's counsellors would consult his opinion before reaching a decision, because he understood the king's heart and his wishes better than anyone else. His adopted father loved him as much, if not more, than his natural sons. When Mai An Tiêm turned 20 years old, the king arranged for him to marry one of his daughters, Princess Kobar, who had been his friend since childhood. The celebration was the most extravagant of the king's reign. So much so that the king's own son, Prince Hao, grew envious, for the lavishness of the wedding party far exceeded his own. "My father means to adopt Mai An Tiêm as his successor," he thought to himself. I must stop this." And so Prince Hal brought a large bribe to the head of the king's bodyguard, and a slightly smaller bribe to the head of his household. In return for this payment, these officials started to spread ugly rumours about Mai An Tiêm. "The king's favouritism has gone to his head. He is plotting a coup." And the further the rumours spread, the less clear it was where they had begun. Eventually, the head of the bodyguard came to the king and said that Mai An Tiêm had tried to recruit his services to overthrow the king. At first, the king would not believe this lie against his adopted son, but soon others in the palace, who confused rumour for fact, backed it up. With great sorrow in his heart, the king decreed that Mai An Tiêm was guilty of plotting treason and must be banished from the kingdom for evermore. His wife, Princess Kobar, swore that she would follow him to the ends of the earth. And soon the couple boarded a ship, which took them far out to sea and deposited them on a desert island. But Mai An Tiêm and Kobar did not despair, for although they had lost all the privileges of friends and comforts, they had at least each other. They found a stream with fresh water, and they built a hut for themselves out of leaves and branches. They made nets for fishing, and they learnt how to climb trees, to pick bananas and shake down coconuts. But although everything they ate was fresh and good, their diet lacked anything that you might call a special treat. Kobar began to dream of sumptuous banquets. One day, after they had been on the island for several years, Mai An Tiêm was walking along the cliffs when he saw a flock of birds squabbling excitedly amongst themselves. As he drew closer, he saw that the cause of all their excitement were some black seeds. He picked up a handful, and when he reached home, he scattered them on the ground around their hut and along the stream. Many months later, during one of the hottest times of the year, he noticed that some unusual plants had begun to sprout on the spot where he had spread the seeds. Over the coming weeks they spread like a vine along the ground, and then some fruits started to bud under the leaves. These grew into enormous green fruits, the likes of which he had never seen before. On cutting them open, he discovered within soft, red flesh. He cut off a piece and popped it into his mouth, and it melted onto his tongue like no other. When a little later Kobar tasted the fruit, she was enormously happy and pleased. It was her first treat in 7 years. The couple decided to call the fruit red melon, and they were careful to spread the seeds and grow a second crop. The red melons, which we know as watermelons, were one of the greatest joys of their life on the island. One day, when Mai An Tiêm was sitting on the beach contemplating the vast ocean and the way his life had turned out, he idly carved his name on a watermelon and tossed it into the waves, wondering where it would wash up. Perhaps someone in some faraway land would be lucky enough to find the delicious fruit, and would forevermore thank the name of Mai An Tiêm that was engraved on its skin. And just as the ocean had been a friend to Mai An Tiêm when he was a baby, so it proved now. The current carried the watermelon back to the kingdom of Vietnam. A fisherman's wife found the wondrous fruit on the beach, and she took it to the palace in hope of a reward. When the king saw the name that was carved on the fruit, he marvelled at the reminder of his long banished son. he tasted the red flesh of the fruit inside. And it was so delicious that he thought it was the greatest present that could be bestowed on a king who was so wealthy that he had every other pleasure that a human being could desire. He thought with love of Mai An Tiêm, and in his heart he forgave him. And 2 weeks after that, a ship sent by the king came to the desert island to bring Mai An Tiêm and Kobar back to the palace. Eventually, Mai An Tiêm became the king of Vietnam, and he ruled wisely to the end of his days. And that's the story of the Watermelon Prince. And don't forget, there are loads more rich stories from all over the world at storynori.com. So drop by soon and listen to some. Until then, from me, Natasha, bye-bye.